Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This is Cop Talk, talking crime, cases, and backing the blue. Now, here are your hosts, Captain Ed Mehmet and Detective Kevin Schroeder.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cop Talk. I'm Kevin Schroeder, your host. I'm here with my co-host, Ed Mehmet.
Hello, WABC listeners and YouTube viewers. Here we are with another interesting guest who I know quite a few years, and I think you'll be very interested in what he has to say.
So today's guest is George Venizelos. Did I pronounce that
Perfect.
right? Beautiful.
Very good.
Okay. George is currently the Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff for the Red Apple Group. He's also a former FBI agent as well as a DEA agent.
Right.
So, George, welcome.
Great to be here, you two guys. You know, it's good to be with Ed.
Yeah, about
About
time we
8
got
and a
you
half
down
years
here.
we've known each other.
We've been reaching out to your agents to get you here. We finally got you here, you know? Tough guy to get, I tell you, doing Cat Show and all these other shows. And Okay, so, George, why don't you tell our audience, our listeners, a little bit about yourself, your
Sure.
background.
I grew up in New Jersey. Grew up in a town called Edgewater, New Jersey, right across the river, where they filmed Cop Town.
Yeah, that's right, Cop Town.
So,
yeah.
but I did spend 2 years in Brooklyn. When we first moved from Massachusetts, I went to kindergarten in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge. My father was a port captain for a Greek shipping company in Brooklyn, Pier 57, so he worked there. And we moved to Edgewater because people at the pier knew about Edgewater. It was an easy commute. So I grew up in Edgewater. Went to Fordham University. Very proud.
Oh, yeah.
Great
school.
Alumni of Fordham University. Met my wife there, and 3 of my 4 kids went there.
Wow.
You know, 1 escaped to Boston College, but the 3, so the family, we have 5 Fordham grads in our family.
Awesome. Congratulations. Great school, Fordham University.
Yeah, it's a funny story how I ended up there. My next door neighbor was a retired FBI agent who was actually the head of security for Imperator Trucking, because Arthur Imperator used to live in Edgewater. Then he moved up to Hill, to Fort Lee. And he was a Fordham grad, and he was like, you know, and I always had this, I always wanted to be an FBI agent my whole life, you know, and then he was like, well, you got to look at Fordham, you know, got to look at Fordham. Well, I'm Greek. My parents wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, so I was pre-med, you know, just to appease my mother. And then I ended up getting into Fordham and going to Fordham, but I switched my sophomore year to accounting.
I was going to say, what was your major in?
Yeah, I switched to accounting. It's funny, a story. We had an FBI agent come to career day at Fordham to speak, and he mentioned that accounting and law was the #1 program to get in. And so I broke my mother's heart, switched out of pre-med, and went to accounting my sophomore year.
So you lived in Jersey. Now, you always lived in Jersey then?
Yeah, I always lived in Jersey, but I always worked. I worked for the shipping company my father worked. At the time, it was the largest Greek flag shipping company, and their headquarters was 39 Broadway. Okay. So I worked 2 years of high school and 4 years in college in the summers. The day school ended, I worked downtown. I would go to the subway downtown and work there, and I work in different departments every summer down there. So I always worked in Manhattan as a kid.
Okay. Cap, jump right in.
Oh, George, did you do any accounting work, or you went right into?
Yeah, I did. I actually did 4 years of accounting because I wanted to get my CPA to make me. The FBI is very tough to get in, you know, and I wanted to be as competitive as possible. So I worked 4 years in accounting to get that background to go in under the accounting program. They have different entry levels programs to get in, and accounting was one of the more popular ones, in law too.
To get into the FBI?
Yeah, because they're all different programs. To get in.
I remember that when I was a young cop. I thought it was you had to be an accountant or a lawyer.
Yeah, but they have a lot of military. They have a lot of ex cops. So, you know, they run a gamut.
Well, anyway, you've had a long, storied career. You went from place to place.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, my first. It's funny when my first office when you go to training, you give your top 10 list or whatever. You do a list where you want to go. I had New York number 1, I had Newark number 2, Philadelphia number 3, and I had Boston. Because my mother was from Massachusetts, I had Boston in the top 5. I think it was 4 or 5. When I graduated the academy, it was in '91. It was during the bank failure crisis, and Boston got hit hard by the bank failures. So anybody who had a accounting degree and had put Boston in the top 10 was shipped to Boston. So I ended up going to Boston, my first FBI office. I wanted to stay here, but I ended up going to Boston. And then, then I worked, it's funny because I had a DEA background, so during the daytime I worked bank fraud. And at night I would do a lot of undercover, because I did a lot of undercover in DEA, and I would do like organized crime, drugs, undercover throughout the New England region. I worked in about 3 or 4 major undercover cases up there.
How many
I
years,
enjoyed the undercover.
How many years DEA?
I had 4 years in DEA. I was right, pretty much out of college. I was like 22-year-old kid, one of the youngest in my class in DEA.
In the DEA, did you work with Jamie Hunt or his father, Jimmy Hunt?
I know Jamie now, but I've heard as his father.
Okay.
And
Yes, that was a legend.
yeah,
DEA.
yeah.
How about
and
Johnny?
DEA was a small agency back then.
Did you work with Johnny Waltz?
No, but again, I knew the name. I was in Newark for a good amount of the time, and then again, I was in Boston with DEA too, so it was like weird.
How about Mike Levine?
No,
Son was Keith Levine, police officer, was killed in line of duty.
no.
Yeah, Keith worked with me, and his dad was Mike Levine, who was a DEA agent
Wow.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, DEA is a great organization. Back then, in the early '80s, I'm talking 1983. It was cocaine was running rapid.
Yeah.
You had and DEA was a small agency then. It's not.
Well,
as
I'm
big as
dated.
it
I
was.
remember it was the Federal Bureau of
Yeah.
Narcotics.
It was, yeah.
And then it was BDAC,
Yeah.
BDAC,
BND,
Bureau of Dangerous Drugs and whatever.
and then it became DEA.
Right.
My son, Kevin, who went to Fordham University
Uh-huh.
as well, did 2 internships with the DEA
Oh, that's
under
great.
Jamie Hunt.
Oh, great. He
Yeah.
probably worked on the ops center. And
Yeah. His plan was to go to the DEA, and maybe still is, but right now he's NYPD.
They're a great agency.
Yeah.
They really are.
So after the DEA, 4 years, you went to the
Accounting. I wanted to get my CPA to make me more competitive to get in the FBI. Because back then, the DEA and FBI had some rivalries,
FBI. And you spent 24 years in the
24
FBI?
years at the FBI, yeah. 24 great years, yeah.
So can you tell us about the...
Yeah, I started I was an agent, a street agent up in Boston, and then I got talked into going to Washington, my first tour of duty. I was a supervisor in a Russian organized crime, which is in the late 90s was very hot. And I went to the unit, the Russian organized crime unit, which was really interesting. So for 2 years, I was in Washington, traveling the world, basically, working all kinds of international organized crime cases with the Russians mainly. The office did all the work. We supported the offices, and we had a couple overseas cases that we were involved in. So and at that time I had 3 children, but I was never home. I was always traveling.
Yeah.
And then I did my 2. You had to do 2 years, so I did my 2 years, and I wasn't a headquarters type, so I did my 2 years. I wanted to get out, so then I went to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as the senior resident agent, a supervisor of a small office of 20 agents. Covered 8 counties in central Pennsylvania, which was a great place. Great place. I really enjoyed it there, but I was there during 9/11. I was, and when 9/11 hit, having grown up where I grew up in Edgewater, watching those towers go up, because I grew up right in the Hudson River, right across from, kind of uptown, up by Washington Heights area. You grew across the river from there. But I always worked downtown, so I used to take the path and stuff. So the towers meant a lot to me. I remember when they were finished. So when I went down, it was like I was one of these guys who were like, I wish I was in New York I wish I was there to help. I'm in Pennsylvania. Then I went down. Then the FBI went through a transformation back then after 9/11. It really changed the FBI a lot. And they dragged me down to Washington from Harrisburg for like 4 months, 3 or 4 months. And what we did down there is we set up the counterterrorism division in Washington. Had career boards and try to bring as many. A lot of New York agents came down, and because they ran the called the Pent Bomb, the investigation for 9/11 out of Washington at the time. So we set up the shop there, and then eventually, 10 months after 9/11, I reported to New York as an assistant special agent in charge. At the time, drugs, but then within a year, they transferred me to terrorism. So I worked terrorism for a little over 2 years, and I was responsible for special events, threats against New York City, domestic terrorism. So that's where I got close with NYPD, because we had 100 detectives in my unit, my section. We had like 200 agents, 100 detectives, and other agencies. We had the JTF, and that was I had a lieutenant, sergeants. You know, you had a supervisor and a sergeant for each squad, and we ran threats 7 days a week, 24/7. I did that for 2 years. Basically, lost 2 years of my life. It was 2003 and 4. We had the Republican Convention, which is a major undertaking at the time, because when Bush went for re-election, there was a lot of threats in New York City.
That was at the Garden.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I finally got back home to New York.
Would you say that 9/11 was the impetus for bringing the FBI closer to local law enforcement?
Yeah.
Because prior to that, there was always a problem between local law enforcement and the FBI.
Yeah, no, and it's like a regional problem. It depends on where you are. In Pennsylvania, you didn't have that problem. You know, the locals, state locals, they all got along really well with the FBI. Boston, because of the Whitey Bulger case, there was a lot of issues. And when I went back, the funny story, I was like the person who tried to bring the FBI and the state police together, because I was a DEA agent up there, and I had a lot of friends in DEA, so I was kind of bringing everybody together. No, but it's true. I think there was a lot more competition in New York City. But JTF had been around for a while, just like the bank robbery task force. So you had people working together, but at the higher levels, you know, it tended to be competitive. But I think you're right. 9/11 did bring the country together as far as law enforcement.
Well, I was a detective, and I recall trying to deal with the FBI at the time, and I think in New York City, it was tough. Maybe because of the organized crime. Organized crime families. The FBI viewed the local cops as being corrupt, and on the payrolls of the organized crime people, and they wouldn't deal with us. They would take our information, but we couldn't get anything from them.
Yeah, that's and a lot of that still happens from time to time, because a lot of it gets classified and you really can't share it. So sometimes they get a bad rap for some of that. But back then it was worse, because organized crime, you had squads for each family back then, and they didn't even talk to each other, So
I heard that.
It was kind of a competitive. Plus, there was so many leaks because the organized crime have infiltrated everybody, from the politicians to probably federal too, state and federal, and so there's always that need to be careful and need to know basis. So.
What about relations with the CIA?
I mean, again, it was before 9/11. It got better. Now, when I was working Russian organized crime, I had developed good relations, and this is pre 9/11. So I got a real inside look at the CIA. We worked jointly on a couple of Russian matters, because basically the KGB came to organized crime is what happened. So there was a lot of need to work together, and we started working together on the Russian matters. And I developed a strong appreciation for CIA, because I would have the badge to go in the building anytime I want, and they really do really great work. It's just that nobody knows what they do because they can't talk about it, and we did some great things together. So moving forward to after 9/11, we did have better relations. Problem is, CIA can't get involved in criminal cases, so it was difficult because you can't disclose their means. I mean, there's a lot of sensitivity to what they do and what they can share and what they can't share, but they definitely work better together after 9/11.
This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
Plan on flying? In order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID. Learn how to get your real ID today at tsa.gov/real ID or visit your local DMV.
You mentioned the Whitey Bulger case. Wasn't that out of Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you said something about Washington, a connection.
No, when I first went to Boston, I was an ex-DA agent that saw both sides. I saw in the early 80s when Whitey was running around, and I was a DEA agent, and DEA had a bunch of cases getting compromised. So, and then when it all came out, what it was, there was Whitey had infiltrated different agencies and stuff like that.
Would you say that the movie was accurate?
Yeah,
To some degree, anyway.
some degree. It's the typical Hollywood. It's just like
What movie's accurate?
I don't even think papers are accurate, to tell you the truth. I think they
nothing
exaggerate
today.
stuff, especially today more than ever.
George, you registered with the 9/11 program?
No, because I came 10 months after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was in Pennsylvania when 9/11 hit. So, but I have a lot of friends, a lot of close friends that have gotten sick and died too from it.
It's of course it's very sad. Since that
It's
day,
tragic.
we've lost double and triple the amount of
Tragic.
people we lost that day. That's why I always tell someone who was ever down there to please make sure you're registered and
Yeah,
follow through.
and that's what's sad is this new generation doesn't even know it now. They don't know what New York was before 9/11.
I mean, there's kids on the fire department and NYPD, and I'm sure in FBI as well.
Yeah,
who
absolutely.
weren't on the job at the time.
No,
You know,
it's
they have
true.
even if they have 20 years on, they weren't on
No,
the time.
it's true.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's very true.
Wow. Now, how did you wind up working for John Catsimatidis?
It's funny when I was I met John when I was in charge of Philly. I was in charge of Philly. I had met somebody, a Greek who had a restaurant there, who knew John, and John was always involved with the Federal Law Enforcement Foundation. He was a director, so I kind of knew of him with that. Before I went to Philly, I kind of met him at one of the FLEF events. But I went to Philly. I got friendly with somebody down there who invited me to different events, and I met John again, and we got to know each other over time, even closer. And then when I came back from Philly, I was in Philly for 2 years, the head of that office, came back to be the head of New York. I really got to know John through the Greek events. I was the Grand Marshal of the Greek Parade. I was like the Greek who succeeded. So what happens is you make a lot of friends because, they want to be around the head of the FBI. So, and then and John was one of the people talking me into being the Grand Marshal of the Greek Independence Day Parade and stuff like that. So we got friendly over that. And then he used to have this event every year with the Hellenic Times event. And the last one they actually had at the Marriott, I was one of 3 people honored. So that's where I got to meet Margot and got to meet the family.
Oh, okay.
And they got to meet my family because my kids came. And we connected right away. I was a big fan of John. And then when I retired, when I initially retired, I went to NYRA to be Vice President of Security for New York Racing Association. And I was, great job, great people, but it was one of these jobs where like you spend the whole summer in Saratoga, so you had no summer vacations. And I lived way out in Jersey. I live out in Sparta, New Jersey, which is 50 miles from the city.
Wow, yeah.
So I'd have to go over 2 bridges to go to Aqueduct. We spend most of the season in Aqueduct. Then you go to Belmont. You go track to track. And then I had run across John at a wake, at a Greek wake. And then, hey, we should go to lunch someday? I said, yeah, anytime you want to go to lunch, we'll go to lunch. And then we went to lunch, and that's when he kind of, asked me, would I consider coming to the company and, need somebody with your leadership ability and all that. And I thought about it, and we talked about it for like 6 months, and it finally happened. Oh, wow. And I've been with them over 8.5 years now.
I had the privilege of calling you to tell you that John wanted to see you for the job.
That's right.
And you were recovering from I
had knee
surgery.
I ruptured my quad,
right.
So I had major surgery in my knee, and remember that, and then and we met Smith & Willis's, of course, and had lunch. And
it's 8.5 years.
That's where I started. And that was probably 9 years ago. It's probably because we danced for 6 months. So that was 9 years ago.
Oh. Yeah. I'm 9 years older. Oh, God.
Time goes fast.
Yeah, Cap.
Well, we talked about your DEA and FBI experience, but we didn't hit much on the DEA.
Let me just ask a question on the FBI. So, 2 questions. One is, John being friends with President Trump, did you, if you were considered for the FBI director?
No, I was.
You wouldn't want it?
I think I got to know President Trump fairly well when I was the head of the New York office, and before he was a politician, and I'm a big fan of his. I think as a person, he's a really good person. Right. I got to know him, and he got to know my family and stuff. So we kind of got along. But I'm not a political guy. I try to stay. I'm like old school FBI, where we don't get involved in politics. Like, I don't think anybody knew who was Republican, who was Democrat. We just knew about right and wrong, and take her into business. And I never really wanted to go back to Washington, so I was never asked or anything, but I never really wanted to go to Washington. But I've always been a Trump fan from afar.
Okay.
I tried it, but I'm not saying I wouldn't. I really bleed FBI. I really love the FBI, and I would do anything to help them. I think they're extremely important to this country. A strong FBI is important, and I really believe that. So I would.
So you're not looking for the job, but if you were asked, you can't say no.
No, you can never say no, but I don't think. I think that's.
Or if you can't refuse.
I think they're looking for some independent person to come in and.
And speaking about the FBI, I've been taking a beating, as you know.
Yeah.
And I know that's it's tough, but what the hell's going on?
Yeah, I mean the FBI is going through some real tough times, perception-wise. Whether it's reality, doesn't matter. Perception becomes reality after a while, and during the years when Trump was not president, the last 4 years, there was some lapses in judgment. I think a lot of it. I personally feel a lot of it was DOJ driven, from Department of Justice, and they had this desire to make Trump look bad as much as they can, and shame on the leaders of the FBI that wouldn't push back.
Right, allowing it to happen.
Like some of these cases, like the Mar-a-Lago, should have been low keyed. It should have been just, hey, It should have made a big deal out of some of these cases, and I think they hurt themselves. But and what hurts me the most is I know what they do and what they're doing and still doing, and how hard they're working and how dedicated the agents, like in New York City, for example, how the agents they just put their nose to the ground and just work. They don't listen to the noise as much as possible.
Right.
And it hurts me for them, because I really believe our adversaries want a weak FBI just like they want a weak NYPD. They want to defund the police, and the FBI is in that category too. And I think it's so bad for this country to have weak law enforcement. I believe in law and order. I believe that a strong FBI is critical to the national security of this country. I've personally worked and witnesses all the good work we've done over the years of keeping terrorism out, keeping organized crime down, going against gangs, going against the spies. There's a lot of responsibilities the FBI has that's critical to the safety of this country. And to have a weak FBI, the people who win are the crooks and the spies and the countries that hate us, because we're the ones that it's our job. It's the FBI's job to keep them out. and they're loving it. They divided this country successfully, whether it's China, Iran, Russia, it's probably all of the above. They want a divided U.S. They want to show the world that democracy doesn't work. And both sides have played into their hands. And it's for me, it's very disappointing and I'm distressed about it. I really, because I love law enforcement, and I love the FBI. To watch it is bad.
Yeah. And listen, there's some great agents. I mean,
Absolutely.
doing God's work every day, and just like the NYPD, and and unfortunately, we get a black eye here and there.
And people forget whether you're an agent, detective, we're people.
Right.
You have good people and bad people. Right. And every organization, I don't care who you are, has people who are bad or people who make mistakes.
Well, good stories don't sell papers. Bad stories do.
And that's the problem these days. Everything has become so political that everybody puts their little political spin on things. And, shame on the FBI for getting involved in the I call it the political web, getting caught up in that web. So now they're being used to make one party look better than the other party, or one person look better than the other person. And what bothers me most is when you have guilty people who've done wrong. Now they're using this negative spin on the political. It's a political witch hunt. It wasn't. A lot of these cases weren't political witch hunts. Especially what we have going on in New York City now. This was investigation into a corrupt organization within the city government.
Speaking of which, what's your thoughts on what's going on with Mayor Adams in regards to the DOJ?
I think Mayor Adams found a way to turn the tables. It's just like every crook wants to discredit the detectives or the agents that are working them. They want to put it on them like they're victims. Right. And he's successfully, through the help of some people, tried to make himself a victim. He wasn't a victim. A lot of this stuff happened before he was mayor. A lot of stuff was initiated years before this migrant crisis, and now they're using him going against the migrant crisis as a way to say he's innocent and he was targeted. And it wasn't just upgrades. There's a lot of different things. And what bothers me the most, which I'm going to go on the radio and talk about, when you have a foreign government like Turkey compromises you, they own you. And the last thing you want to be owned by a foreign government that's not really U.S. friendly, whether it's China. China's a master at it. Whether it's politicians or whatever, once they get you to bite that carrot, whether it's taking whatever, they own you, because then they could use it against you, and they could say, and they'll compromise you. Yeah. And they may only use it once, or they may wait patiently when they want to use it. But at some point, they're going to come and use it against you, and they're going to try to. They said, if you don't play ball with us, we're going to expose you, and that's what's dangerous about this. But everybody's just, it's airfare upgrades. It's more than that. And if you look at the whole administration, you had 7 resignations and maybe 4 more to come, right? Right. These people a lot of them have their own problems, their own investigations, they've all been charged. This could go down in history, one of the most corrupt city halls in the history of New York City.
It's really crazy.
Start thinking about it.
Captain?
Well, getting back to Adams, you're right. A lot of this stuff preceded the migrants. He was under investigation. It goes back to Ulrich, the buildings commissioner, who, by the way, has not yet gone to trial. And the belief is that he was a cooperating witness, and they were holding him off. And, what's interesting, now that they dropped the case against Adams, what happens to the people that made deals? Yeah. Is the government committed to give them the break that they would have gotten had they testified?
It raises a lot of questions. And I think I commend the prosecutors who resigned under protest. That takes a lot to do. The media will spin it different ways depending on what side of the aisle you sit on. They'll spin it one way or the other. We're like 2 countries going at the same time. You watch one channel, you see a different world than the other channel. It's sad what's happening to this country.
Is there a possibility that the Manhattan DA's office would take over the case?
I think it is. I think there is a possibility. I think some of the people that are being investigated by Brooklyn DA, for example, and then some of them are by Manhattan DA. Some of the staff, some of the people who, whether it's within the police department or with the mayor's office, it wasn't just all federal investigations going on. And it's like and you got to tell me he doesn't know what's going on. He didn't know what was going on down below. But depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, people are spinning it different ways, and they're making everything political when it should be about right or wrong. It shouldn't be about Democrat and Republican. It should be what's good for America is right or wrong. Here you want to run on a platform of law and order, right? And then you're going against law and order because you're trying to say it was political. Maybe it wasn't political, So and that's what bothers me. But the FBI gets a bad rap because they're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their job is to investigate. They don't prosecute. They investigate. They get the facts. They present it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they prosecute it. That's their job. They can't say, we can't investigate this because it's against a former president, or you can't do this because it's against a sitting president. They have to escape both. You know how you know the FBI is doing their job when both sides are mad at them.
Right.
The Menendez, he wasn't a Republican. And somebody who's been investigated for the last 10 years, if not longer.
But what you say was not the case in what's his name, Comey, with Hillary Clinton.
That was another mistake. He shouldn't have run out and had his own press conference. I mean, to me that started the political web that the FBI got caught in. Was that I think Comey got FBI, made them political when they should never be political.
He actually just made the decision not to prosecute.
It's not his decision.
I know, but his speech.
His speech. You're absolutely right what he said, and that's why he should have never had that press conference. It should have been. It's a prosecutor's.
I know.
Decision.
I thought that was totally wrong for him to do that.
And there's a reason why you have that segregation of duties, the check against each other, and that's one of the complaints I have. In the old days, whether you're NYPD or FBI, you do the investigations, you package it, and you give it.
Right.
What's happening now is DOJ is almost doing an investigation, or prosecutors are trying to run all the cases. They shouldn't be running the cases. They should be prosecuting the cases. There should be that division. There's a check against each other. That's the problem, because they're political appointees. FBI's career, especially in the field. You have U.S. attorneys are appointees. The heads of offices are career people. You should never mix the two. You have to work together because you need to know what evidence to gather, and you need to work as a team, get subpoenas. But at the end of the day, investigators should be investigating, prosecutors should be prosecuting.
Before you mentioned the FBI getting bad rap, they got a bad rap on the J. Edgar Hoover, and then it changed. Could you explain how the appointment is now? Because he held on forever, but I believe there's a 10-year appointment.
And the reason they make it a 10-year appointment, there's only one. Director Mueller actually did it. He did a 12-year. He got a 2-year extension, and because people could say what they want about him. He was as non-political as he got. He didn't do a lot of press conferences. He was a Marine. He was a former Marine that was spent his whole life in public service. Now, the reason they do a 10-year term is you want to be able to cross across two administrations. Right. You don't want to be the director for one administration. You want to, because that's why 10 years, you figure a person can appoint somebody and be president for 8 years, right? But you should have the ability to go 10 years. The FBI should always be non-political. It should be non-political.
But is that 10-year appointment, how can I say it? Can the director be removed by the president, or it has to go through Congress?
Apparently it's happened twice, so. It happened once with Comey, and, I'm sure they had to justify it, and I'm sure that they'll find ways to justify it, and this other guy just left because he knew that. So it was really Trump appointed Ray. Yeah, I know. He's, so Ray's a Republican. He's a conservative.
Right.
but he became the fall guy, you know. And I'm not saying he was that great. I think he should have pushed back more. You know, he had his own issues, but mostly people are good people. It's just the media and politics could dirty up anybody. Any three of us could get dirtied up in a second,
Right.
based on you know, the media. They could say what they want to say.
So that 10-year term is not inviolate. It reminds me of the police commissioner of New York's term. It's 5 years, but no one, which carries into the next administration, and they can be removed. The police commissioner can be removed at any time.
Yeah.
So that 5-year appointment is nonsense. That's what it sounds like with the 10-year appointment of the FBI.
Yeah, and now that's kind of going by the wayside. You know, now you're having people trying to intimidate and say, hey, you know, if I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to get rid of you. And that's the worst thing that could happen to this country. So we need reform. We need some reform.
George, who would you think was a good FBI director?
I think Mueller. Mueller's the one I knew the most because out of my 24 years, I had him for 12 years. And his first week was 9/11. So he's somebody who learned under fire. Now, he's somebody who was apolitical as possible. I don't think anybody really knew what he was, a Republican or Democrat. Both sides got along with him. He got along with both sides. Because he was a no-nonsense Marine, wasn't a PR guy. Well, Comey was more PR. Comey liked the press. Mueller didn't like the press. He didn't like to deal with the press. He let the heads of the offices deal with the press. So, and Louis Freeh was a good one, too. Louis Freeh was a no-nonsense director who was an agent for like 4 years, 5 years. So he understood the FBI. He was a judge. He was a federal judge. And he was very independent to a point where his last few years, he didn't even talk to President Clinton because they had a falling out with the Monica Lewinsky case. But he still did it, you know, and he was a man of principle, too. He was probably one of my favorite, and Mueller was my other favorite.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Mueller and Freeh are my two favorites.
Now, when you were with the FBI in New York, who's the police commissioner?
It was Kelly. Because before I went to Philly, I was acting during the Times Square attempted bombing.
Right.
I was like the acting boss, you know, for like 6 months, and then I went to Philly to be the head of Philly. And when I came back, Ray was here still. But I worked with Ray because I went through 4 different jobs in New York. I was number 2 for 4 years. So when I was number 2, I dealt with a lot of things the other people didn't want to deal with, kind of like I'm doing here, you know. So, you know, but doing that, you learned a lot, and and when I was at JTTF, I actually love Ray Kelly. I thought he was one of the greatest police commissioners I ever worked with, and then I had Bratton for 1 year because when Ray left, when I was the head of the office, I had Bray for a year, and then there was an election, and I had Bratton, and I liked them both. They're both different styles. I mean, I thought they were both. I know they didn't get along, but I know they both have different. Where Ray was more hardcore, you know, and Bratton was more political. You know, he was in L.A. and stuff like that. And
John Miller, you worked with too?
Yeah, I worked with John Miller even when he was in the FBI. He was in, people forget, he was in the FBI for a few years as in charge of public relations for the FBI. He's a really smart man. He was never an agent or a police officer, but he was a reporter. Right. So he understood the sources and stuff like that. He really understood terrorism. You know, he really was really smart with that terrorism stuff.
I agree.
Well, he was friendly with the FBI agent who was killed the day of the World Trade Center.
John O'Neill.
He was quite friendly with him.
Yeah, they were drinking buddies. So they went out, and O'Neill was bigger than life in the FBI. That was his first day as head of security for the World Trade Center.
Wow. No, I was friendly.
Sad story.
I was friendly with John.
I didn't know him though. I didn't know him, but I heard he was a real bright guy. Was ahead of his time with terrorism when nobody took terrorism serious. You know, everything was organized crime and all that stuff. But he was always a believer terrorism was a threat, and he ended up dying with it. It's just a sad story.
Yeah, sad story. True.
George, what is your idea about the future of the FBI?
I think the FBI is, again, it's too important, and I think whoever the next person is, whether it's Kash Patel or anybody, will develop an appreciation for what they do, because I think they do so much more than the public knows, and I think the public's only seeing, the FBI's, they're corrupt. They went after Trump. They didn't go after Trump. They just were doing their job. Now, some of their leaders made some really bad decisions, back down in Washington. So that's where they need to shake things up. But I think they will realize the importance and what the FBI does when a new director goes in there, and hopefully the new director could root out any bias there is in the FBI. There should be no bias in there. I agree with that. Nobody even should. There should never be a political bias anywhere. But they are human. So, but I think you can't. You got to do things. It's got to be right or wrong. It's got to be. And I think they will survive. I think they're too important in this country. They have really, really great, hardworking people there. Right now, they're going through a tough time because right now they're under a microscope. For example, this January 6th case, they're trying to identify all the agents who worked it and did something on it, and they created a database, which is dangerous. The database can never get leaked because then you're going to have crazies going after agents. They were just doing their job, interviewing people. They were told what to do. It's kind of like a military where you go overseas, like the Vietnam War. These soldiers went over there because they were told to go over there. They were following orders, and they come back and they were mistreated. Here is these agents that were told to work this case, and now all of a sudden they're going to be mistreated because they worked a case on the January 6th case. I think it was probably overdone, so I think there is some issues there. But to sit there and put it on a whole agency and agents who are some of the most dedicated public servants you're going to have in this country, and the people who are criticizing them on the media and stuff, what do they know? They don't know. They were never agents. They were no detectives. They're just talkers, and that's what upsets me the most. It's just they don't know what they're talking about. They're just trying to push an agenda, push a political bias, and then in the process, people get hurt, and that's what bothers me the most. Good people get hurt. True. And
we feel your pain. No, we do.
No, and the PD went through the same thing.
Exactly.
It wasn't the first time, it won't be the last time.
Exactly. On that note, my next question would be, you worked at many police departments, Boston,
Philadelphia,
Philly, towns in Pennsylvania, NYPD.
I mean, it's not even close. NYPD, I put them in categories the best police in the world. That's how highly I think of them. And that's not to disparage Boston or Philadelphia.
Oh, no. Of course not.
It's just that they're very progressive. I mean, nobody has the experience they have as far as dealing with crime every day. They've done it. I credit NYPD for making this city the success it is. Because without a safe city, nobody want to live here. Companies won't want to work here. And it's all about NYPD. Now, Pennsylvania, our relation, and the reason, and that's a good question, because the reason there's always been problems in the past with the FBI, because NYPD feels they don't need the FBI, and the FBI feels they don't need NYPD. 9/11 proved that you need each other.
Right. True.
And together, when they work together, nobody can stop us. And they get it now. The cooperation is great. Right. It's great. And it started at the top bottom. With these other departments, are good departments, great people, same, it's a calling, working in law enforcement, people, but they're more dependent on the FBI. That's why the FBI gets treated better, because they don't have the numbers. NYPD has the numbers. They have the skill sets. Their intel division that they formed after 9/11 is very progressive and done a great job. They're overseas. And it's working with NYPD, and I think the reason JTTF was so successful is the agents and the detectives learned from each other. The PD had the strengths the agents didn't have, and the agents had strengths the PD didn't have. And you cannot operate in this city without the cooperation of NYPD.
Right.
So I was, through my JTTF, I became a huge fan. And through my first year here, I ran the drug task force, the drugs, and the drugs, the cooperation was always there with drugs. The PD and the agents always had some great drug cases.
We had the DETF.
Yeah, the one in DEA. I was like that's one of the oldest task forces in the city.
Yeah.
They do tremendous work.
do.
But nobody hears about it. All the one they hear about is the screw-ups.
Exactly. That's what sells the newspapers.
That's the problem.
Exactly.
I blame media for a lot of this stuff.
Oh, of course. Oh, absolutely. We agree with you with that. Cap?
Before we conclude, George, do you have any last words?
Yeah,
Final words?
well, it's been a pleasure sitting with you two guys, two of my favorite people, and
Thank you.
I think your podcast is really important for the country, for the city, because the city has to realize law and order is the most important aspect now of the city. You got to get law and order back, and you can't. I remember the days when you get caught with a gun. It's 1 year. And a crime, it's a 1 year mandatory.
Yep.
Those days need to come back. Then you'll see the guns get off the street. But I think your message is important because we really got to get the proper message without a political spin on it.
Right.
It should just be black and white. We just get down to for good versus evil. That's what this is all about. And I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. We couldn't
Thank
agree
you.
more with you. And again, thank you for being here. But one last question. So, like Columbo, right? One more thing. What is your take on the next New York City mayor's race?
That's really interesting. I wish we found another Bloomberg type that would sit back and let the police commissioner be the police commissioner. I think the reason things were so successful and Ray Kelly was such a successful police commissioner is the mayor let him be commissioner. And he had confidence in him. We need to get something like that back.
Yeah.
Ray served 12 years, longest
12 years, yeah.
longest serving commissioner in New York City history.
Yeah. And back then he had a great relationship with the FBI director. They were both Marines. They both got along. Yeah. So what's disappointing to me is there's a lot of talent in this city. Again, they probably don't want to go through the microscope of running for public office and being treated like a crook by the other side. But I wish we could get two really strong candidates. I don't know if we're going to get it. So I don't know. You have to say, Cuomo might be the front runner by name recognition, was a governor all these years, but is he the best choice? I don't know. I don't know.
I would think he'd want his governor job back, not really on the mayor.
Yeah. It's kind of sad, the greatest city in the world, and I still think New York's the greatest city in the world, always will be, that you don't have a Bloomberg type step up.
Right.
True. So.
True, I agree. Yep.
I think we covered it all.
Okay. Thanks, boss.
Thank you.
On that note, George, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for your service and the great job you did with the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, as well as the FBI.
Thank you.
And, like I said, I know you guys support the NYPD and we support the FBI, and it's all BS that's out there in the press. We know that. But bad stories sell papers, right?
That's right. That's sad.
So,
we've come to that.
George Venizelos, did I get it right?
Yep.
George Venizelos, thank you so much for being our guest today on Cop Talk. Everyone, if you like what you hear, Cop Talk at WABC Radio, and also you can follow us on YouTube. And Captain, go ahead.
Yes, don't forget YouTube. We'll see George in the flesh.
Very good.
Until next time, God bless you, God bless America, God bless law enforcement throughout the world, and God bless our U.S. military. Thank you for listening.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.